Into the wild, here we go! Hey there, hope you're having a great day. Let's talk about this book, The Greatest Dungeon Master's Guide that exists for D&D and all D&D related tabletop games. And we're going to go into the wild discussing wilderness travel. Not how to run it, kinda. I actually just want to talk about some of the clever things that this book covers when it comes to wilderness. A refined way of playing this game over the last 50 years. I haven't been playing this game for 50 years. Do you need a map? Do you need to use a road? What dangers lie in trees and what lies ahead of your journey? These are things and thoughts that players think about when travel comes up in D&D. The reason why everyone finds D&D travel boring is because a lot of dungeon masters don't know how to run it right. And on top of that, not enough dungeon masters teach players what to expect from travel and going into the wild. The book covers watches, routes, hex crawls, and point crawls. A big part of it is hex crawls. It's something that I don't normally do in my games, but it does cover point crawls, which I do have experience in. And when it comes to watches and routes, it's an interesting concept that I think is worth sharing and for you to think about. And if you want to get deeper into it, link down below if you want this book, not sponsored. The most important thing about travel is that you can skip it. You can just skip it, and it's great advice. You can sum it up with those descriptors that are mentioned earlier, such as like 3 elements with 3 details and a couple really cool details. Keep it pithy, keep it tight, and that's your travel. And that's okay. Or you can choose a route, and let's talk about routes. Routes can be the main road, back trail, boat. It can be going through the sewers. Each choice should be meaningful. If I take the main road, I'll get there the fastest. But the problem is bandits rule the road and I don't want to deal with them. Okay, let's consider taking the sewers, or more like a maze so we can get lost and there might be monsters down there. Okay, what about the back trail? Well, we bump into some monsters, but we will get there faster. In some way, each route should have a meaningful effect, like a pros and a con, and letting the players choose which route to take, kind of like having multiple doors in a dungeon, something that a lot of people online like to talk about, Zelda dungeons, enables agency and enables the idea of exploration because we got to choose to go these different roads and paths and secret tunnels and stuff. What is a route? So let's define a route so you can apply this to every sense of travel that you do. A route is defined by the sequences of landmarks along the way, whether it's cities, towns, inns, mountains, oceanic views, and it's also the encounters along the way between the landmarks. It could be orcs, bandits, it could be a busted down wagon, and this is what you really need for travel. You need to understand that a route between 2 different places, whether it's the forest, the road, the sewers, doesn't matter. It's defined by the landmarks and the encounters along the way. And you need a little mix of both. You can have 1 to 3 landmarks, and more landmarks mean more travel, and then between the landmarks you can have encounters. Or roll randomly to see if there are encounters. It can be monsters, it can be traveling people, it can be something special and unique to your world. And then you could roll to see if they're hostile, if they're attacking immediately, if they're friendly, or they're just passing by. And right there, that's almost enough travel for most people. And this book gets deep and thick in how much you want for travel. It's incredible. For example, it covers those hex crawls that I don't really know that well, but it does cover those point crawls that I do. Point crawl, write down the name of a place. Write down the name of another place. Connect those places with a line. That is a point crawl map. I use it all the time when I'm building out a town or a region or this little spot on the map. So I can just have a visual of like, here's downtown, here's uptown, here's the mayor's, here's central of town, here's the shrine, and I connect them with routes and paths that can be taken that I can see, oh, this is where people go, and that's how players will move through the town. And that guides me in my description. Oh, you want to go from downtown to the shrine? Well, you got to pass through the center of town. So I'll describe the passing through center of town to get to the shrine. And then you can have dotted lines between different places. And those are more secret paths. Trails. Probably the villains know more than the players. You can also have one of these places on your point crawl be roads. And that kind of doesn't make sense, but hear me out. So a major place is downtown, another major place is the shrine, and you could go through these different locations in town to get to there, or you can go to the main road and which will pass you through the whole place. And so you can use these locations as landmarks to describe along the way. And between each landmark, you can roll to see if there's an encounter. And so the higher resolution your point crawl map becomes, it kind of communicates how long the travel is. So let's say you see a landmark per day of travel. Well, every day we see this landmark and we roll to see if there's an encounter that day. No? Great. Rest, move on to the next place. There are so many ways to run travel. And it's a beautiful thing, especially when you study older editions versions of travel, because it gets your brain thinking of how did somebody else do it before, and how did decades of people enjoy it? What are some of the modifications other people have taken, and how do I adapt that to the game that I'm currently playing so me and my players have fun? The important thing that comes to travel and why it's so hard for fluid travel systems in newer versions of D&D is that older versions of D&D are heavily focused around resource management and survival. This is not something that a lot of new players are expecting because they're coming in from Critical Role, Stranger Things, and they feel like it's more of a theatrical play, when survival management is a massive part of its history and where travel actually matters. And if you ask people who do travel the wilderness, whether they're hikers, campers, or whatever, resource management and survival is an important aspect. One of these important aspects is your travel pace. How fast are you moving in your travel? We actually see remnants of this kind of thinking in the player's handbook, but it's not really connected to anything. It's just a blurb, but it is important. It's important to cover the style and the flourish of your travel, because that's important in a game of imagination, but it also covers how much ground you cover. And unless you're using hex crawls, it's very hard to know what you're doing, because the game is built off of using hex crawls. Travel should change depending on the terrain. Desert, Arctic, grasslands, whatever. This book starts a good conversation of using a table on how slow you get, not by feet or anything like that, but like how much ground is less covered. In the conversation of the watch, what I find interesting, it's watch actions. If you've seen the 101 dungeon video that I made about this book, I mentioned that earlier versions of this game use the same mechanics across the board for different things. From combat having rounds, turns, and actions in 5 to 6 seconds, dungeon crawling, you have rounds, turns, and actions in 10 minutes. And in travel, we have watch, which is a very similar system where we have rounds and turns and watch actions that allow us to broadly say what we're doing every turn and every round as we go through the journey. Players can make camp, navigate, focus on pulling on the wagon, they can rest, they can forage for food and supplies, they can scout ahead or even follow some tracks, and there's a handful more. I don't typically use that stuff, mostly because I don't use hex crawls or I don't have massive traveling between towns and cities, and I think that just comes from a different style of play, but it's also super important to understand and learn, so when I want to travel between towns, I know what I'm doing. I have a system in place. I have a tool set that I can memorize, or at least glue onto my DM screen. How big is this book? You know, how many pages? This book cost $25 US, and it's 500 plus pages. This has more value than any $60+ Dungeon Master's guide for any system you want to run. This covers dungeons, mysteries, raids and heists, urban adventures, into the wild, and it has a chapter on extra credit, ways you can go above and beyond as a Dungeon Master. I'm going to be reading this book for a long time and rereading it over and over and over. Will I use every single thing in this book? No. Will I understand how to run a great game for my players? Absolutely. You can expect many more videos to come with me reading this book and talking about things I have learned from it and things that I might even just adapt to other systems and give my players a fun travel between town to dungeon, town to town, city to city, port to port. And you can too if you check out this book, link down below. Make sure you're having fun playing Dungeons & Dragons with your friends, and I'm Carmichael, and I will see you next time.